a minute with our presentation led by Mr. Kasey Klepfer. I will lead that presentation, or he'll lead that presentation in just a second, but we'll hold off for just a minute. Go ahead and get started. So thank you again for joining us today for our third installment of our webinar series. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Kasey Klepfer, who will be leading us on a presentation regarding Trellis's Student Financial Wellness Survey, especially for discussing implications for community colleges. I'm going to take a moment to indicate that it is an honor to have Kasey join us because he is a dear friend of mine and a former coworker, and the presentation that he's about to give is something that I have thoroughly enjoyed hearing over the years, and I think that you will learn a lot in terms of the realities that our students at our community colleges are facing with regards to their student financial wellness. Before we get started, I want to speak his praises and read his bio. So Mr. Kasey Klepfer is a Senior Research Analyst for Trellis Research. Mr. Klepfer is nationally renowned for his work as a project lead for Trellis's Student Financial Wellness Survey, the data that we will be reading about or learning about today. A project designed to provide insights into the financial challenges facing students in higher education and how they relate to academic success. A Central Texas native, Mr. Klepfer earned his Master's of Public Affairs from the LBJ School at the University of Texas at Austin and his bachelor's degree in History and Government from UT's College of Liberal Arts. Again, this is going to be an excellent conversation, a very relevant conversation considering the dynamics that we are facing with our students that have only become more stark in light of COVID-19. And so I hope that you all have a number of questions that you'd like to discuss throughout the presentation. In terms of housekeeping, we are recording this webinar, so this will be shared after the presentation is completed. If you have any questions, please use the chat function below. Kasey and I will be monitoring that, and so we will be more than happy to interject those questions as they come up. And so without further ado, Kasey, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, like Manny said, I've known Dr. Gonzalez for 17 years now, right out of high school we met. And so I'm so happy that he invited me to speak with you all today and to speak on this really important topic, which is student financial wellness. So a little bit of a kind of an agenda setting because we have an action-packed agenda today. I want to talk to you a little bit about Trellis and who we are. And about the Student Financial Wellness Survey, which is the source of data we'll be talking about throughout this presentation. And then I want to put some context around of college affordability for students, move into talking a little bit how about students support their family financially, how they're paying for college, and then get into student finances and some of the struggles they're experiencing, basic needs security issues, and then end with how student perceptions of institutions and the institutional support. And finally, some promising practices and things that schools are doing using the data from the Student Financial Wellness Survey and just more broadly to address some of these issues. The Student Financial Wellness Survey is completely free for institutions to use. And we are currently enrolling schools for fall 2020. So if you're interested, you can reach out to me after the presentation and we can make sure that your school can participate if you would like that. So a little bit about Trellis. So Trellis has been around for over 40 years. We're a nonprofit, a little outside of Austin, Texas in Round Rock. We do lots of things. We do philanthropic giving through our foundation. We have direct services that we do to support schools and students. And then we have a research team. And the Trellis Research team has done a lot of research over the years around student loans, student loan counseling. And over the past probably 7 or 8 years, we've really focused on looking at student success as it relates to student finances and financial barriers to success. So we invite you to follow us on Twitter at Trellis Research. That's where you can see anything new we have coming up and see some of our discussions around these topics. And it's really the best way to follow us. At the address on your screen, Trellis Research, trelliscompany.org/research is where you can find the latest copy of the Student Financial Wellness Survey and any of our other publications that we've been working on. So the Student Financial Wellness Survey is a free service we offer to schools. The idea is that if an institution has a better understanding of the financial barriers on a whole range of topics, they're better positioned to do strategic planning, to build initiatives, and things that we're seeing more and more of is applying to grants and winning grant proposals by both using the information in the survey to demonstrate the need for such projects, but also demonstrating that there is a data collection component, and some institutions even put it in as an evaluation component. So it's been very successful in helping win some grants for institutions. So the Fall 2019 survey we launched on October 21st, 2019. So this was before the COVID-19 virus, and we can assume that a lot of the results that we're looking at are going to be even more stark for students, and the challenges even more stark for students in this new year. We surveyed over 480,000 students across 20 states at 78 institutions. We had 54 public 2-year institutions, 15 public 4-year, and 9 4-year private institutions. Because of that, we are going to be splitting the results up between 2-year institutions and then all 4-year institutions together, private and public together. There was a response rate of about 7.9% across all schools. The survey only takes about 13 minutes, which is really good considering it's a 130 question survey. And we've designed it so that it's really easy for students to take. About over 80% of anyone who starts the survey finishes the whole thing. So once again, if you're interested in more about that survey, we can talk later. So let's dive right into college affordability context. The first thing that I think is important to talk about when we talk about college affordability is unmet need. And so unmet need is an out-of-pocket expense, the cost of college that students have to come up with after the expected family contribution from their family, if there is one, and any sources that don't need to be repaid, such as grants, scholarships, and work study. And so when you look nationally, we're looking at data from a CLASP study, around 3 out of 4 students have unmet need. And it's an average of about $5,000 a year at public 2-year institutions and about $9,100 a year at public 4-year institutions. This unmet need has risen by 23% since 2011 school year. And it's important to know that is a national average, and it varies from state to state. This is the amount of money that a student would need to come up with, and in this case with student loans or some other funding sources. In Texas, we have a unit record system where we can actually calculate an unmet need even if you include student loans. And so in Texas, even if you include student loans into the calculation of unmet need, low-income students have an unmet need of about $8,000 annually at public 2-year institutions and about $9,000 at public 4-year institutions. So unmet need is very high for students. There's, after all of their grants, after all of their scholarships, loans, their expected family contributions in Texas, there's still a large amount of money that student is going to have to come up with each year. And you see that amount of money is concerning students. So this is the first chart I'm going to present. On the left is 2-year institutions. On the right is 4-year institutions. The blue are students that agree or strongly agree with the statement, I worry about having enough money to pay for school. So at community colleges, we found that 61% of students say that they worry about having enough money to pay for school. This is a little bit higher at 4-year institutions, where 70% of students say that they worry about having enough money to pay for school. Those students that did say it's that they worry about paying for college, they were more likely to be first generation students. They were more likely to be under 25 years of age. And in this case, they were more likely to be female. We do know that female students lead single family households at greater rates. And that can be one reason that they are indicating some more financial challenges. We ask students more to the point, do you know how you will pay for college next semester? So here we're looking at students who disagreed or strongly disagreed with that statement that I know how I will pay for college next semester. And at community colleges, 22%, more than 1 in 5 students disagreed or strongly disagreed that they knew how they'll pay for college next semester. Those students were more likely to be first generation students, and they were more likely to be female. So students are concerned about paying for college, but these college costs are not the only thing that students are having to allocate funds for and allocate resources for. Many students are supporting family financially. We ask students, is it important that you support your family financially while in college? And 54% of community college students agreed or strongly agreed that it's important they support their family while in college. So more than half. This is much higher than at four-year institutions, where only 31% said that it is important they support their family financially while in college. So let's dig down a little bit and find out which kind of family members are students supporting financially. At two-year institutions, 32% of students said that they support a child or children. In this graph, we're looking at the blue is going to be two-year institutions, and the tan is going to be four-year institutions. And these are all respondents who said yes, that they support these family members. So almost a third of students at community college are supporting a child or children. And I think this is really important because, number one, it's showing that community colleges are serving the students in their states that are supporting families. And that's really important to not only understand when considering services and support, but also when communicating to legislatures and outside groups and in grant funding, that this is the place where Texas families, in our case, are supporting, are trying to better their lives, earn a degree, increase their earning potential, and things like that. So beyond the almost third of community college students that support a child or children, more than 1 in 10 said that they support their parents or guardians, 15%. Another 11% said that they support other family members besides their parents and guardians. And 19% said that they support a spouse financially while in college. So these students are not only paying for college and going to college, they're supporting family, they're supporting other family members and things like that. So let's talk a little bit about how students are actually paying for college. This is a really big graph, and we're going to come back to it a couple times. So let me kind of explain what's in it. In the blue bar, we're looking at two-year institutions, and in the tan bar, we're looking at four-year institutions. These are any students that said yes, they used the funds listed below as a method to pay for college. So the first thing to consider when you're looking at this chart is that these funding sources are very broad. There's lots of ways that students are piecing together money in order to pay for school. 40, 50 years ago, even maybe 30 years ago, you could pay for college with a grant by working while going to school and maybe a student loan. And those three sources would pretty much pay for a public institution going to and earning a degree there. Today, with the rising cost of college, that's just doesn't cut it anymore. And so students are turning to other sources in order to pay for school. When these funding sources become broad, there is more of a risk that if one of the sources falls out, that student is going to have a hard time replacing. So even a small scholarship of $500 or a funding source from parents that goes away, especially thinking about things like losing their job in, let's say, a pandemic. if those parents are no longer able to contribute that money, that student has to come up with that money. So the point being is that when one of these broad sources falls out, students are going to have a challenging time replacing that funding source. So let's go through and kind of use the methods that pay for college to dig deeper into some other questions in the Student Financial Wellness Survey. So when you ask all students, do you work for pay? About 3/4, 75% of community college students work for pay. When you ask them, do you use your current employment to pay for college? 61% of community college students are saying that they use their current employment as a way to pay for school. So we ask any student that said they work for pay, how many hours do you spend in a typical 7-day work week working for pay? And at community colleges, 39% of workers said that they work 40 or more hours while in school. This is compared to only 19% of four-year institution workers who say they work 40 or more hours a week at their jobs. This is very different than those who say they work fewer than 20 hours. 40% of four-year institution workers say they work fewer than 20 hours. Only 21% of community college workers work fewer than 20 hours. So when you look at this distribution, you know, it is stark that community college students are working at higher rates than four-year institution students. So that's really important to consider. When we ask those student workers, do you consider yourself a student who works or a worker that goes to school? Community college students were more split on whether they consider themselves a student first or a worker first. So at four-year institutions, which we're looking on the right side here, 79% of workers consider themselves a student first and a worker second. At two-year institutions, 54% consider themselves a student first and a worker second, and 46% of community college see themselves as a worker first and a student second. So that's really important to kind of think about when you're thinking about the importance of work for your students. So let's talk about student loans now, another way that students are using to pay for college. So we asked students, do you have a student loan that you took out for yourself? 35% of community college students said that they have a student loan they took out for themselves. And that's compared to 57% of four-year institution students who said they had a student loan. So we're seeing that community college students are self-reporting that they're borrowing at lower rates. They are also reporting at much lower rates that their parents took a student loan out to help them pay for school. At four-year institutions, 24% of respondents said their parents took a student loan out for them. Only 5% of community college students said that. So when we ask any of the respondents who said they have a student loan they took out for themselves, we say, how confident are you that you'll be able to pay off the debt acquired while you were a student? At two-year institutions, 70% of student borrowers said that they were less than confident they would be able to pay off that debt acquired while they were a student. This is important because research also shows that students tend to overestimate the amount of money they'll make after they graduate. So students are probably overestimating how much money they'll make after school, and they're still less than confident that they'll be able to pay off that debt. This is where things like loan counseling and financial education that concentrates on where to go when you have help, where to struggle, how to, when you're struggling, things like that can help, because this is probably an anxiety indicator, something that I'm really not confident that this amount of money I've borrowed I can pay off. Maybe sometimes with planning and a better understanding of repayment and things like that, students could become more confident. So we asked those student loan borrowers, do you have more student loan debt than you expected to have at this point? And here, 58% of community college students agreed or strongly agreed that they have more debt than they expected to have at this point. So research also shows that students tend to underestimate their student loan balance. So students are probably underestimating their student loan balance, and still over half are saying, I have more debt than I expected to have at this point. Let's also talk about credit cards. Many students are borrowing on credit cards. So half of all respondents said that they borrowed on a credit card in the last year. When you ask, did you use that credit card as a method to pay for college? 27% of community college students said that they are paying for college with a credit card. So this can be a positive or negative thing. If it's certainly a funding source that if it's paid off can come with rewards, and it's also a way that you can put a lump sum on something and then pay it off. But it also comes with risk. The first is that the interest rates are much, much higher than, say, a federal student loan. So if the student falls behind, those interest rates kick in, and that can harm them financially. But probably even more important to consider with institutions, if a student doesn't pay that full amount of the credit card balance back, they're not going to have access to the credit line that they did in the previous semester. So the access to credit line that they have in the next semester may not be enough to pay for college. So relying on credit cards as a method to pay for college is problematic in certain ways. So we did ask all respondents who said that they borrowed on a credit card, how many times did you use a credit card for something you didn't have money for in the last year? What we found is that 85% of two-year institution credit card users used it one or more times for something they didn't have money for. 2/3 used it 3 or more times for something they did not have money for. And 45% of community college credit card users used it 5 or more times in the last year for something they did not have money for. So this set of information right here is very interesting. So we ask anyone who borrowed on a credit card, do you always pay your credit card bill on time? And at two-year institution, over 3/4 of students, 77%, said that they agreed or strongly agreed that they always pay their credit card bill on time. But then if you ask, do you fully pay off your credit card balance each month, only 27% of two-year institution credit card users said they fully pay off that credit card balance. So that kind of gets to the point I was talking about before. If they're not fully paying off that credit card, they're incurring interest, which can put them in some obligations, monthly obligations that can be very financially challenging, and that can reduce their ability to come up with funds in case of an emergency, in case of when life happens. But also, if they're not fully paying off that credit card, they're not going to have access to that same level when they are paying for the next semester of college. And like we said before, more than 1 in 5 students at community colleges said they don't know how they'll pay for college next semester. It's also, important to think about payday loans and auto title loans. So we asked all students, and this isn't a question of do you use these to pay for school? This is just, have you borrowed on a payday loan or an auto title loan in the last year? And we found that 7% of students at community college took out a payday loan, and another 7% said that they took out an auto title loan in the last year. So these products are very risky. The interest rates are astronomical compared to even credit cards. And often these products have been known for some predatory lending practices. One of the key ways that a person will borrow a payday loan is if they go into one of these shops trying to get a check cashed and using a check cashing service. And that is usually a gateway for these products. So one of the key ways to keep students or anyone from borrowing these risky products is to make sure or help that they're banked. And so we do have a question in the survey for institutions to look at to find out how many of their students have a checking account, have a savings account, or either one or the other. So finally, there's also a lot of other sources that students use to pay for college that I just want to cover. And the most important part I think about, some of the sources underlined here is that community college students report that that they use these methods at lower rates. So 36% of community college students said that they get support from their parents or their family, and that's compared to 63% at four-year institutions. 49% of community college students use personal savings to pay for college, and that's compared to 63% at four-year institutions. And finally, 33% of community college students said that they used a scholarship to pay for college, and that's compared to 63% of students. About similar rates of community college and four-year institution students had a Pell Grant or another grant to pay for school. This is self-reported at 59% for community colleges. So we just talked a lot about students' situation paying for college, their anxiety to pay for college. And so now I want to transition into student finances. But before that, I do want to just pause, and if anyone has a question to put in the chat, I would be happy to answer it right here. It's a kind of a nice to take a pause after me talking straight for all that time. So if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat, and I'll wait a little bit, and if not, I'll move on.
Well, here, Kasey, I will ask a question at least to give folks time to type in questions if they have any. So you've thrown a number of data points that are alarming in many regards. What can institutions do, and even trustees and leadership do to help address some of these issues in a proactive way? In terms of what are some solutions that you've seen institutions put in place to help mitigate students being unbanked or students struggling, month to month, semester to semester? And again, you feel free to talk in generalities, understanding that there's a wide diversity of institutions, attending this webinar with, varying levels of resources available to them.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a couple slides at the end where I'll touch on some things, but this is a great time to talk about that because there are things that institutions are doing to support students. Since I'll talk more in detail later, let me just kind of broadly say advising is one thing. So more and more students are helping, our schools are helping students create a financial plan for how to get through college. We've done a lot of work on getting academic plans for students, and now schools are starting to couple that with financial planning. Certainly, if the more and more that folks at schools understand these issues, the more and more they can have conversations with students about these funding sources dropping out. What happens when parents can't support the same amount of money anymore, or what happens when a savings runs out and something like that. Those conversations can be very important. As far as savings account, there's a really great program at Austin Community College where they partnered with the local federal credit union, and they, through some grants, are able to incentivize student savings. So if students do certain actions, their savings are matched, and the whole goal is to try to get students a savings account where they can go in case of an emergency. Really great program. And then beyond that, there's resources. There's emergency grant programs are becoming very important, and it's very important to fund those either through grants or through allocations because they are showing to be helpful for students who may have to drop out for really small dollar amounts. There's food banks, there's clothes closets, there's all sorts of things that schools are doing to help students with more resources to address these challenges. So I will talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation, but I'll answer these two chat questions that came up. Is this information also available for participating institutions? Yes, absolutely. By participating in the survey, the school gets a customized report of their results with a comparison group to their sector. All of these questions are presented, and then it has context around these issues, best practices. We try to work really hard to make this report really beneficial to the institution. And certainly one of the important things is seeing those levels of how students are paying for college at each individual institution. So absolutely, when, the reason we do this survey is to get the data that I'm presenting on aggregate into students or into schools' arms in a very specific way to their students. So this is all customized reports for participating institutions. So I have a question from Annette. Hi, Annette, how are you? It says, how is the CARES Act funding able to cover some of these challenges? So this is, a new thing, and I'm, not the expert on how CARES Act funds have been being used. Certainly it's something we're looking at with the schools we're working at. I know that they are being used to bolster emergency grant programs. But beyond that, I just don't think I have enough knowledge right now to give some of the best practices around there. It's certainly something that I think would be great to reach out to Christy in the Texas Success Center to talk about. And it's certainly something we're documenting with the schools we're working with. Okay, so with that, I think I'll get back into the presentation, and we'll have time. Go ahead and keep putting questions in the chat, and then when we're finished, we'll answer it. So now we've talked about students worrying about paying for college. They're supporting family financially while they're in college, and the methods that they're using to pay for college are really broad, and there's some challenges associated with those. So let's get into some actual student finances and some challenges students are facing. So we asked students, do you worry about being able to pay your current monthly expenses? More than half of students worry about paying current monthly expenses. 53% at community college agreed or strongly agreed that they worry about being able to pay their current monthly expenses. We asked students, would you have trouble getting $500 in cash or credit in order to meet an unexpected need in the next month? Here, 61% of community college students said yes, they would have trouble getting that $500 in case of an emergency. This is slightly higher, but not much higher than at four-year institutions, where 57% said that they would have trouble getting $500 in cash or credit. So these students that did say they would have trouble getting that $500, they were more likely to be first generation. They were more likely to be enrolled full-time. They were more likely to worry about having enough money to pay for school, and they were less likely to know how they'll pay for college next semester. So some of these measures we'll look at, and most of them are very much connected to students who are also worried about paying for school and not knowing how they'll pay for next semester. So these student finances seem to be directly related to student success and a worrying about how they'll pay for school and having enough money for school in general. We asked students in the past 12 months, how many times did you run out of money? In the blue, we're looking at community colleges, and at the tan, we're looking at four-year institutions. A third of community college students said that they ran out of money 5 or more times in the last year. Over half of community college students said that they ran out of money 3 or more times, and then almost 3 out of 4 students ran out of money at least once in the last year. Those students who said that they ran out of money 5 or more times, those 1 out of 3 students at community colleges, they were more likely to be first generation students. They were more likely to have trouble getting that $500 in case of an emergency. They were more likely to worry about having enough money to pay for school, and they were less likely to know how they'll pay for school next semester. So we asked, is the total amount of debt you have, credit card, car loan, money owed to family or friends, is that debt overwhelming to you right now? And 46% of community college students said that their total debt is overwhelming to them. And this is certainly a connection. This question is connecting to stress and to emotional distress. And, when almost half of students are saying their debt's overwhelming, that's super important to consider, especially when you consider how emotional distress and being overwhelmed relates to student success, relates to their ability to say, this experience of me going to school and trying to be successful is doable, you know. And when a student is overwhelmed or has emotional distress, that's certainly they're going to struggle more in school. So not only are students struggling with some kind of day-to-day finances, but they're also struggling with basic need security. So we use the USDA food security scale. We use a 6-question scale. And basically, if someone is food insecure, they're reporting multiple indications of reduced quality, variety, or desirability of their diet, and that there is some indication of reduced food intake. I encourage you to go look at the Student Financial Wellness Survey and see the questions that make up the USDA Food Security Scale, and see the responses to those individual questions. And certainly if your institution participates, you'll get your institution's responses to those individual questions. So you can see what makes somebody insecure in this scale. But basically, out of 6 questions, if you answer 5 or 6 in the affirmative, you have very low food security, which is the tan bar in this graph. If you answer 3 or 4 in the affirmative, you have low food security, which is the blue bar. And then below that, 1 or 2, you're considered to have marginal or high food security. So here we're representing students that have either low or very low food security. And at 2-year institutions, more than half of students have low or very low food security, including 28% who have very low food security. So those students who had low or very low food security, they were more likely to be first-generation students. They were more likely to be female in this case. They were more likely to have trouble getting that $500 in case of an emergency. And once again, they worry about having enough money to pay for college at greater rates, and they're less likely to know how they'll pay for college next semester. We also use a housing security scale. This is based off of folks that are leaders in the field on this, academics and centers like the Hope Center. But basically, if you're housing insecure, it means you're indicating that you have broad sets of challenges, such as your inability to pay rent or utilities, you're needing to move frequently, you're living in a house beyond the occupancy that's suggested for that house. And so at 2-year institutions, 49% of respondents showed signs of housing insecurity. So once again, I encourage you to look in the full report, and I'm sure we can probably send that out to the group after the presentation. Go look at the questions that make up that scale. See how many percentages of students are saying that they are unable to pay utilities or rent or things like that. But with almost half of students experiencing some housing insecurity, that's certainly another indication of some problematic basic needs challenges for students. So those students that were housing insecure, more likely to be first generation, more likely to be female. In this case, they're more likely to be part-time students. They were more likely to be over 25 years of age. And once again, more likely to have trouble getting $500 in an emergency. They worry about paying for college at higher rates, and they're less likely to know how they'll pay for next semester. Homelessness is also a serious issue on campus. And at 2-year institutions, 15% of our respondents indicated homelessness within the last year or since they started school. And this isn't much higher than at 4-year institutions, where 13% of students are reporting homeless. And so, you know, not to be a broken record, but once again, these students are more likely to be first generation, female, part-time students, over 25 years of age. They're more likely to worry about having enough money to pay for school and less likely to know how they'll pay for school next semester. So students are experiencing a lot of challenges financially, and institutions are working to support them in these circumstances. So we do, as part of the financial wellness survey, we wanted to ask students their perceptions of how the institution supports them for a couple of reasons. Number one, we want to give institutions an idea of how their students are feeling about their services. If there are services and students aren't reporting, maybe there's a marketing concern there that schools can get the awareness out more about those services. But probably more importantly, to kind of understand what's the sense of belonging on campus amongst students. So there's been lots of research over the last 30 years on a sense of belonging on campus, and that being tied to higher retention and better student success. Less has been researched about the sense of financial belonging, meaning do the folks at the school understand my financial challenges? Are other students experiencing financial challenges like I am? Do I belong here in that? But I think it's a probably safe hypothesis to think that if a student is feeling like they don't belong at the school because it's too expensive, because the institution doesn't seem to be acknowledging how hard it is to go to school, or even if they don't understand that maybe a lot of folks are struggling with the same issues they are, then there can be a sense of belonging issue that may affect persistence and retention. So in this section, I think, after such a sobering set of statistics about student finances, it's important that I also highlight some of the really great things about community colleges. And one of the things is measured in this Net Promoter Score. So what a Net Promoter Score is it's used across, it's standardized across products, things like, dishwashers and Kleenex and cars, and it's increasingly being used to measure services and products like college. And so what it is you say, how likely is it that you would recommend the product, in this case, your school, to a friend or family member? And what research has shown is that in a scale from 0 to 10, anyone who answers a 9 to 10 is a promoter. People that answer 7 or 8 actually are passive. It's almost a neutral answer. And then anyone who answers a 6 or below is actually a detractor of the product. And there's a lot of research behind that. And then it's made a composite score. And so what we look down here is that public 2-year institutions have a much, much higher Net Promoter Score than in this case, we're looking at public 4 years. It's even lower for private 4 years. So a 39.46 Net Promoter Score for community colleges and 8.68 for public 4 years. Anything above a 0 is considered a good Net Promoter Score, and means in general folks are a promoter of the product. But anything getting close to 50 is like Coca-Cola territory. So what this is showing me is that students are really appreciate their community college, and they have a strong loyalty to them. But even when you really get into the question itself, how likely is it that you'll recommend your school to a friend or family member? To me, this is now getting into community, and it's getting into what is the message amongst community about this community college or this other institution, and how likely is it that we're going to talk to younger siblings or family or friends that also might go to the institution about what it's like. And so I think it's something that community college can be really proud of, that they have such a high Net Promoter Score. So we ask students, is your school aware of the financial challenges you face? 40% of respondents at 2-year institutions say agreed or strongly agreed that the school is aware of their financial challenges. This is higher than at 4-year institutions, where it's 32%. But 29% of respondents did disagree or strongly disagreed that the school is aware of those financial challenges, and that is also something to think about what it means if a respondent say, my school is not aware of my financial challenges. We ask a series of questions around things like tuition, textbooks, required class supplies, food, housing, and we ask, does your school work to make this more affordable? So I really encourage you to go dig into the wellness survey and see how students are answering this. But more importantly, if your institution participates, you'll get these stats for your student body. But one of the, another really great finding for community colleges is that when you ask students, does your school work to make tuition more affordable? 70% of respondents at community college agreed or strongly agreed, and only 11% of community college students disagreed or strongly disagreed that their school works to make tuition more affordable. This is much, much higher than four-year institutions. Only 35% of respondents at four-year institutions agreed that their school works to make tuition more affordable. So of the three most important stats I talked about today to community college, what I consider the first one is almost a third are supporting their children while attending a community college. That's really important. The second one would be that net promoter score and how high it is that students are saying, I'm likely to recommend community colleges. But then this one is the third, and it's that 70% of community college respondents agreed or strongly agreed that community college work to make tuition more affordable. That's a huge thing that I think you all should be very proud of. Now, textbooks are a little bit different matter. We hear common concerns amongst students that classes require textbooks that are too expensive and that they're rarely used. Sometimes at the community college, focus groups we've done, they've said, this book costs more than that class did. And so we found that 35% of respondents at community colleges say that they disagree their school works to make textbooks more affordable. Now, this is 57% at four-year institutions, but still, when 1 out of 3 students is saying my school doesn't work to make textbooks more affordable, it's certainly something that we can concentrate on. Now, if an institution does have a program like an open education resource program and students are still saying this, then maybe there's a marketing issue there. Maybe students don't know about that good work that schools are doing. But either way, this is an important stat that institutions can look at. So in this last section, I want to talk about what institutions are doing to support students. So now would be a great time to put in the chat any questions you might have had about the presentation, and we can answer them after this section. So one bucket of things that institutions are doing to support students is advising. So acknowledging and understanding that paying for college is challenging is the first step. And communicating that to students, I believe, is really important, because I think one of the things that trips up students is when they don't know how challenging it could be or might be. And I think it's better to have a conversation with them about how are you paying for colleges and what happens when you come into a resource challenge. And that's just, good advising can help that. And especially when multiple areas of the institution are on the same page with understanding student finances, that can reinforce these messages. It can reinforce where students should go if they have a resource challenge. It can reinforce that there are folks at the school trying to help them. It can also reinforce that there are challenges, and that by planning and thinking about finances, that's the best shot you have to not run into a challenge that forces you to leave school or forces something else. Like I mentioned before, a lot of institutions are starting to do a financial plan. At some institutions, they're mostly four-year private institutions. Some institutional grants fall off after 2 years. So helping a student understand this year in college, your funding sources might change can be important. But it's also important to talk about what a financial plan means about what's an implication of going from full-time to part-time. How does that affect your aid? How does that affect your funding source? What does it mean if you have a course where you have to take that affects your work schedule? Having these conversations can be really helpful for students. And sometimes it just requires having a tougher, just acknowledging that college costs are high, even for some at community colleges, when we talked about that unmet need annually, and that it does take some some support in planning to be successful. Helping students to get enrolled in savings accounts. Once again, the model at Austin Community College is a great one, and I think it's one that is replicable at other institutions. And then finally, crisis support teams to help support students in financial crises or that are struggling with some, tough basic needs security issues. So this is something that has been highly successful in mental health at colleges and universities across the country. So the idea that when someone becomes in crisis, and they talk to someone at the institution, that can trigger many folks coming together to support that student from different areas, whether it be financial aid, student services, et cetera. And so the key to that is that there needs to be a knowledge that when a student comes to anyone on campus with an issue, that can be escalated more broadly to better support that student. And I think that's a really important model. So the next bucket I want to talk about is resources. So a lot of institutions are using the data from the Student Financial Wellness Survey to justify new programs and interventions, to evaluate those programs and interventions moving forward, and to apply to grants and funding sources to better pay for those resources. So things like food pantries, temporary housing, transportation vouchers, emergency funding, things like that. All of those can be really important. I think a really low-hanging fruit thing is encouraging faculty to just put on their syllabus information about where students can get resources and support if they have it. That can be a really, great tool, and it's, relatively easy to implement. For food security, a lot of institutions are working with their food vendors to make sure that there is a low price and healthy food option that's available at all time. Things like that can be really important to students, especially if you can just ensure that there's one sort of meal that's very, very affordable. That can be great. There have been a series of very rigorous research studies that have shown that programs that have a financial component to student support services have seen measurable outcomes in retention. One of these is the ASAP program that was started at the CUNY schools in New York. They have, like I said, in some of the most rigorous research designs, it's been shown to increase retention and graduation. And so these are things like emergency funding, extra grants, transportation vouchers, helping when students hit a financial barrier, coupled with advising and things like that. Another really great program is Project Quest out of San Antonio, Texas. And this is another program that's through rigorous research design shown that the workforce outcomes and that the increase in wage earning amongst people in that program are really high. And that program also has financial components of it, of helping with transportation and financial challenges. So I think that's important because, it's kind of proven now that financial components with other support services do work to improve retention and graduation. And then finally, with resources, connecting campus resources and financial education to, in kind of a high profile way, can destigmatize some of the concern that students have about using resources. And certainly Amarillo College is one of the leaders in the nation about creating this campus culture that destigmatizes using help. I mean, you do see students, and it always kind of warms my heart that a student who's struggling so much would say, no, those are resources for people who really need it, who are really in bad shape, and not for me. I don't want to take that resource away. When in reality, they're struggling and they deserve and need those resources to be successful. So destigmatizing that is something that colleges have done that has been successful. And so finally, just thinking more about that campus culture, When you do staff and faculty training on these financial realities, it can be really important to breaking, stereotypes of what is a student who seems disengaged or with their head down on the desk all about. Are they actually working a lot or supporting family members, up early to, take care of grandparents, children, things like that? Understanding realities of student life and finances can be a great way to, in the Amarillo College's model, have that culture of caring where everyone is really understanding the challenges that everyone's facing. I think that communication strategies that provide realistic costs of educations are really important, because there's nothing worse than if a student comes up with the reality of going to school that is different than what they thought, or even worse, different than what everyone's been telling them. And so, beyond tuition fees, having a realistic understanding of textbooks and housing and food and providing to that, I think, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that, being clear about costs of college, I think students will, I think that they can rise to the occasion of the challenges. Should they have to face so many challenges while going to school? That's a separate question. But I do believe if they understand what they are going, what to expect, that they can rise to that challenge. And then finally, using data to better understand the student experience is something that many schools are doing with success. And one way is the Student Financial Wellness Survey. Once again, completely free for institutions. You get a really great infographic and set of reports for your institution. You have comparison groups to other institutions in your sector, and it's a really great opportunity. We are signing up institutions right now for fall 2020. Our deadline, we have no deadline to sign up, but October 1st is the last date that we'll accept anybody who gets the data request that we need to do it, and some of the other steps. So I'd encourage if you think this is important for your institution, to reach out to me. I can tell you right away whether I'm talking to someone at your institution already about doing this. Certainly in fall 2018, I think over 30, about 35 Texas community colleges all did the wellness survey. And I've heard really great things from them about how they've used the data and how helpful it was for them. So I invite you to reach out to me. My email is right here. And I just want to say thank you again for inviting me to speak on this issue. And thank you so much for serving students in Texas, and if you are outside of Texas, from wherever you are. So with that, I'll go to the chat and see if anyone has any questions.
Yep, and again, thank you. And I'll filibuster a little bit to allow folks to ask any questions that may come up with the couple minutes we have left. I do want to say I appreciate you, Kasey, for all the work and research that you've done and continue to do in this space. I know based off of the work that we've done in the past, one of the things that we've heard in terms of successes is not allowing perfect being the enemy of good. And so, the Amarillo College examples that you brought up, the Alamo colleges that do a lot of great work. I know a number of institutions across the country do great work, and those don't happen overnight in terms of creating large advocacy centers or addressing some of the needs that students are facing. And so things can happen incrementally, and please don't let the overwhelming nature of addressing student need be a detractor to even getting started. And so I know that's something that we've heard time and time again in terms of folks who do work in this space, that it may have started as a curricular venture from a faculty member in a closet that has since evolved into a large square footage center dedicated for student needs. So anyways, I just wanted to leave on that note, and I wanted to again appreciate Kasey for the work that he does, and the work that everybody does in this space. Seeing no questions, I guess we'll wrap it up. Again, thank you very much, Kasey, for the presentation. We will probably reach out to you a number of times as folks reach out to us seeking for more information regarding how to participate in the study. Again, feel free to reach out to Kasey directly, or feel free to email me and I can put you in connection with Kasey. If there's no other words, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Kasey. Thank you, Christy Short at the Success Center. We appreciate you all, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So until then, take good care.
Thank you.
Bye.